and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of The Democratic View. I'm the hostess. My name is Phyllis Italiano, and today I have with me someone who you've known because she's been here before, and it's Kathee Cunningham of the Quiet Skies Coalition. Chairperson?
Chair, yes, indeed.
Chair of the Quiet Skies Coalition, who is going to talk to us about something that, let's say, is in the news today and certainly on the forefront of issues in East Hampton, and that is our airport. So the Second Court of Appeals turned down and denied what?
Well, in 2015, the town adopted 3 regulations to protect the public from noise. One was a curfew on all aircraft from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The second was a curfew on aircraft that met the definition of noisy, which applies to most helicopters, some jets, from 8 p.m. to 9 a.m. And the third regulation was something called the once-a-week rule, which limited aircraft that were defined as noisy to 1 arrival and 1 departure a week. You can only come back and forth once per week per tail number, which would have had done remarkably diminished sound impacts for some of the air taxis like Blade and so forth that come out. If you sit at the airport on a Friday afternoon, you can see, if you stay there long enough, you'll see the same aircraft come back with another shift of people. It's literally a shuttle service to take people to and from New York, to East Hampton, and then they go back and pick up more people. So that would have put.
If you don't see it, you can hear it.
You can hear it.
Because I hear it all the time.
That's true. If you don't see it, you can surely hear it. So the once-a-week rule was really critical to diminishing noise impacts. The curfew was great, but it was really only applicable to about 8 or 9% of all the operations. All the traffic that was coming in and out. It was a very small percentage that were coming in the off hours anyway. Although, as a person who has been awakened at 2 a.m., I was grateful for the curfew.
I know the feeling.
Right.
I too.
Right. So the once-a-week rule back in, let's see, I think this is 2015. I guess it was early 2016. A group called the Friends of East Hampton Airport, which encompassed a lot of national helicopter companies, the National Business Aviation Association, a lot of big national, big boys, and including Sound Aircraft, which is the local fixed-based operator, sued the town and sought what they call a temporary injunction, which means that the court says your rule is no good, you can't use that. So the first round of legal issues occurred actually in 2015. I'm forgetting now the dates. I think it was 2015. And the federal judge, which is a different level of our court system, placed a temporary injunction, permitted the temporary injunction on the once-a-week rule, but allowed that the curfews were reasonable and could be in place. And that was a huge victory for us because it affirmed something we've been led to believe was the right of the municipal proprietor. A municipal proprietor, it means that a municipality owns the airport, and the town of East Hampton owns the airport. As a matter of fact, because it's the town's airport, all of us own that airport.
That's right.
It belongs to each and every one
You
of the
bet.
residents of this town.
That's right.
So the rights of the proprietor had been upheld in a different court case that happened, 10 or 15 years ago, called National Helicopter versus the City of New York, by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which allowed, as because the city was a municipal proprietor, it could limit the numbers of helicopter flights, which the city at that time was trying to diminish tourism flights that were on weekends in particular, because it was really shattering the peace and quiet of residents in the city streets, because they would fly low, and those tall buildings create these canyons of sound, so it was just unbearable. And they were successful at the Second Circuit level because the Second Circuit affirmed the proprietor's rights to protect the public from noise. So we were convinced that because the town is a municipal proprietor, that the appeal of the once-a-week rule, because we got both the curfews were affirmed, but the once-a-week rule was not. And so the town, with Quiet Sky's support, of course, philosophically, went ahead and appealed the federal court judge's ruling against the town's once-a-week rule, and that went to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And on November 4th, 3 days before the other shocking news that we've all had, it was a rough week, boy, I'll tell you. Hard to pull your head up off the pillow. The Second Circuit handed down a ruling that said that granted the temporary injunction on the once-a-week rule and permitted the temporary injunction on the curfews. So we lost the whole thing. We lost the whole thing in the Second Circuit. So now we have no curfews.
Are you kidding? I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a profound loss. It's a profound loss. So the way the court system works is when you go to the appellate level, they have a panel. There are 9 judges on that court. Generally, when you appeal, there are 3 judges that are appointed to the panel. So our case was heard by a 3-judge panel. Generally, the next step in such a thing is to move to an en banc, which means you ask for the whole court to hear it. And then, failing that, you would go to the U.S. Supreme Court. So the town has decided, and Quiet Skies didn't agree with this, but the town decided to go directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. The likelihood of success in either instance is slim. I think we might have had, a slightly greater chance of success in the Second Circuit before an en banc, if they granted it, which apparently they don't grant very many. But the town decided to go directly to the Supreme Court to petition the Supreme Court for a hearing. What's most disturbing about this ruling is that the court overruled itself, meaning that it did not see these rights as of the proprietor here in the same way it did in National Helicopter, which could, in fact, overturn the whole that whole decision with the National Helicopter Company, which I don't even know if it's in business anymore, but the tourism helicopters, it changes the landscape profoundly. So we're puzzled by it. We're very confident in our appeal. The appellate attorney, Kathleen Sullivan, she's very highly recommended, and we thought she was terrific, but we didn't feel as confident in the prep work that the Kaplan Kirsch and Rockwell firm had done to prepare her. So, there have been several missteps, and I'm speaking delicately with Kirsch, leading into that.
I've read many a letter about it.
Yeah, yes. To the appeal. So it's unclear. And courts are made of people. Judges are people like anybody else, and it's really baffling. It was not a ruling it was an outcome we knew was possible, but it was just so not what we anticipated. It was, way down in the percentage of likelihood for us.
So you are telling me, because I really want to understand this and I want everybody to understand it. We lost all of what we had gained?
We lost everything. We have nothing. The airport is now open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the Friends of East Hampton Airport that the Airport Noise and Capacity Act of 1990 was the prevailing federal regulation on this. what it really raises at this point, Phyllis, I have to tell you, and I want, it's important for me to have this disclaimer, because I don't want to close the airport. I never wanted to close the airport. I don't actually want to live in a community where someone says, oh, no, you can't do that. You know, there are certain things that we all can do and live together as a collaborative, unified community. I don't mind the airport. I don't mind the recreative flyers. They're not my issue. But it's these bigger companies that are trying to make a boatload of money by, you know, creating a shuttle service and the related noise impacts and avgas emissions that are a big problem for me. But what I think has happened is the local aviation community, which was, it's a group of very independent-minded people, so they don't always act in a unified way anyway. And I understand that. I really get that. Had, you know, for many years fronted for the commercial interests because they felt that they had common ground in some way. And now it turns out they don't really, and I think have come to regret the, you know, bearing the mantle for the commercial interests, because what is going to happen now, the discussion is now going to be, well, if we can't control it, then we should probably close it. And that is not a position the Quiet Skies Coalition has ever embraced.
You know, I didn't really
it's
either.
It's not my personal point of view, but every single person that I talk to about this ruling says, because what the Second Circuit has said is you own that airport, but you cannot control it. So if we can't control it, what are our options? How does the town board, in its sworn duty to protect the public, you know, to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the public, how are they able to protect us from this aircraft noise and these, you know, emissions and so forth, especially given that there's mounting evidence in the medical community that sleep disturbance is, you know, by loud sounds, it contributes to cardiac disease and a whole bunch of other, you know, physical ailments. It's a really big problem. So I think what's going to be on the table now, and I, you know, I don't support it personally, but I think it's, you know, if I'm the decision maker, if I'm the policy maker, I cannot look at the outcome of this appeal and not say, okay, well, we should be thinking at least about, you know, maybe we need to close it. Maybe that's the only thing we can do.
Well, one of the reasons, and I agree with you, I never thought that I would ever be for the airport closing. Mm-hmm. I never thought I would. Mm-hmm. But in light of losing all of this mm-hmm. stuff, I have been thinking to myself since this happened of, what does this mean? Mm-hmm. If we can't control this mm-hmm. at all, can we become even larger?
Absolutely.
Can we become a little LaGuardia?
Absolutely. There's no preventing that at this point, apart from the will of the town board not to expand services. And presently we have a town board that's not looking to do that, but that's not, you know,
that's
not a foregone conclusion. Exactly.
Right.
So
we know in the last election, as a matter of fact, there was a lot of money put into the
almost $500,000.
Yes.
It was jaw-dropping. I'd never seen anything like that on a local level.
Yeah.
So you know, we have a big problem ahead of us, and I think, you know, I'm not really sure what options there are. I think that there may be a possibility to negotiate with some of the pilots, but to my mind, we have two groups of aviators. I think the local aviators would be happy to negotiate, but the commercial operators have little motivation to do that because they don't have to live in this community. And
well, they only care about one thing, making
mm-hmm.
money.
That's true.
You know, whereas the other guys are really concerned with, mm-hmm. You know, I'm flying my little plane mm-hmm. and I like it and all mm-hmm. that kind of stuff. They're two different.
No, they're two different groups, and it's really a shame that we've had so much animosity between the noise affected and the local aviation group. I think that's beginning to dissipate a little bit, as the local aviators are seeing what a risk these commercial operators have become to their little sanctity, the sanctity of their, hobby, really. And I don't blame, I have no problem with that. I think flying is fun. I like to fly. I don't have any issue with it specifically. But I'm not sure what the next steps are. I really don't know. I know that one of the options, see, here's the problem. We had hoped that the law and the way we interpreted the law, including a number of really smart attorneys, was that the national helicopter case that the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled on, a decade or more ago, was the prevailing law supporting a municipal proprietor's right to protect the public from noise and, impose certain hours of operation, limit numbers and concentrations of flights, and, deal with the noise issue in that way. The other option was to go the FAA route, which is not, the FAA is not a cooperative agency. It's a recalcitrant agency, and it has a very long history of not approving what they call a Part 161 study. And it's part, the Federal Aviation Regulations, or the FAR, has something in it called Part 161, where municipal proprietors can petition the FAA for the ability to control noise-making aircraft. There was only one success story of that, which was in Naples, Florida, and it was almost 20 years ago. And it was for Stage 2 jets, which are not even made any longer. But the problem with the FAA is there's sort of a fox guarding the hen house thing going on there,
Well, the problem with the FAA is that if there's not a lot of planes in the air, they don't have anything to do.
Mm-hmm. That's
so
true.
So they're going to promote as much as they can for flight.
Right. Well, that's their
they don't care about us.
That's their reason. I mean, part of the problem is, and I think Senator Schumer and Gillibrand introduced a bill last spring to bring the noise mitigation and noise issues, aircraft noise issues, back under the Environmental Protection Agency and take it out of the aegis of the Federal Aviation Administration, because kind of like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they don't have any incentive really to work on noise issues, because they are trying to. I have no problem with that either. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to promote aviation. That's fine. They're supposed to make rules and regulations that protect people on the ground as well as people in the sky. And this noise affected do appear on their radar, but as a very tiny, minuscule blip, only once every 10 years or something. It's not the squeaky wheel for them. The truth is that most of the airports in the country are not obliged to the FAA. They function under FAA rules for flight regulations, but they're not bound by grant assurances and the Airport Noise Capacity Act and those kinds of things. So
how come?
Well, because they're small and they opted out. They opted not to. I mean, one of the problems East Hampton has goes back to a long time, when the 1990 Airport Noise Capacity Act was introduced in 1990, and at the time, the town board had the option to opt out of it. They did not employ that option. Pat Trunzo was the airport liaison at the time, and he introduced the legislation, and it didn't go anywhere. So this is a little bit of, we could have opted out, but we didn't. And I think that's one of the problems, because this Airport Noise Capacity Act of 1990, most of the tenets of that really apply to much larger airports than ours. It's not the kind of thing that we really need to be governed by. But because we did not opt out of it, and because at one point we did take FAA funding, apparently that has some bearing on it. But it's a big, stupid mess.
How many acres are there?
There are over 600. I want to say 628, but I think there are over 600 acres.
And right now, that land does not serve the interests of the people of East Hampton. even though we own it.
Well, it serves a very small percentage of the people of East Hampton. It also serves a small percentage of the people of Southampton. About half of the fixed, the planes that are based here are owned by Southampton residents, and about half are owned by East Hampton residents.
You're talking about the small aircraft.
Yeah, I'm talking about the reason they have hangars and so forth. But the commuter flights, we don't know where those people are coming or going to. We don't know if they own homes here, if they're just, it's like taking a taxi, we don't know where they're coming or going.
Another thing that was proposed was the cutting of 21
yes, right.
acres of
Well,
trees.
I know. There are several problems with that. Chief among them is that the airport is located over our sole source aquifer, which is where we get all our drinking water from. And even that has some pollution problems, but not as bad as some other areas. It's also, uniquely, it was the first federally protected aquifer. So what's been happening now is, because the town board has been trying to satisfy some of the concerns of the aviation community to address safety and maintenance needs there, and they've done a lot of work and bonded for hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of work on various projects. One of the things was to remove obstructions from the flight path for nighttime instrument landings. And that's a complicated ratio and so forth. But what we discovered was that the airport master plan that was adopted in 2010 mistakenly identified a higher slope for larger planes than we planned on having and intended to have. So that's being remedied by the engineering firm that's doing this work. But in the meantime, these obstructions, which are trees, apparently there were almost 22 acres, 21.8 acres, that they were going to clear cut because that seemed to be the cheaper option to do it. And when the environmental community found out about that, all those folks went crazy, because we know for climate change and certainly for water purity, trees are your best defense.
Yes, indeed.
So it's still undetermined how many acres will need to be cleared once they go back and properly calculate what this ratio is, because I was at the meeting where they discussed it, and through the diligence of Pat Tronzo and David Gruber and Charles Aaron, they were able to uncover the fact that there was a mistake in the calculations. So they've gone back to recalculate it, and I think the Airport Management Advisory Committee, or AMAC, is going to meet, I think, next week to discuss what the next steps will be. One of the concerns is that the airport has been operating under these conditions for decades, and it appears that one of the ratios, the 20-to-1 ratio, has town pledged to clear to that but didn't. And the FAA at one point signed off on that, because what they'll do is come and observe the operations and see if things are going okay. But we're hopeful that the FAA will come and say, look, it's been fine all these years, let's just leave it. And we won't have to take any trees down. But if they don't, then some trees will be coming down, it would seem to me.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, it's just not good. It's not good. I'm sorry,
Well,
it's not a happy
you have
report.
painted a very bleak picture for us, and I just want to remind people that you should absolutely not stop calling. I know how difficult it is. I used to call all the time, and then when it looked like we were going to make progress, I stopped calling. I almost wanted to make a sign for today to bring in the number. because I called 3 times today, just while I was having my breakfast.
Really? That's amazing.
Well, it's over
Yeah.
my house.
Sure.
I mean, I can't help but hear. I can't identify what it
Right.
is. I don't know whether it's what
Right.
kind of plane or what it
Right,
is. But there
right.
were 3 times.
Right.
And then when I walked out the door to get into my car, there was another one. And then as I drove down the street, there was another one. You know, so it's like, oh my God. But you have to do it. And it's 1-800-376-4817. And don't forget it. Write it down and make sure you make those calls, because that's evidence that we are being bothered by that sound. And I want to mention something else. I don't know if you know, but you know Suffolk County has the worst air pollution problem
Yes, I do know.
in the state of New York.
State, yes.
And you know what? That's one of the things that absolutely contributes to it. So it's going to affect what you breathe, what you drink, and what you hear. The only thing you don't do is smell them or taste them.
Oh, you can smell it. If you
Sure,
go,
no,
you
you're
can
right.
smell
I
that.
do-
You
I
can
do in
smell
the-
that
at the
avgas.
beach.
It's pretty smelly. I've gone there to watch, and it's. I don't know how the folks that work there can stand it. It's quite a bit of exhaust.
Well, when they come home with when they come down with their diseases later on in
Yeah,
their
poor
life.
things. I mean, anyway, it's. I wish I had more. I wish I had better news. I just think that people need to make sure the town board understands that our quality of life is the most important thing to us here. We're happy to play with the aviators, but they've got to play in a way that is equitable.
Couldn't agree with you more, Kathy.
Okay.
Thank you for coming and explaining this to us.
I hope it was clear.
It was clear. It was clear. And, the show is on 5 times a week. If you don't catch it one time, see it again.
Okay.
Because it's very important that people know it. 1-800-376-4817. See, I know it by heart. When you're calling it all the time, how can you?
Sure.
And you must.
Right.
And you must.
You can also go online, too. There's an online form, too.
Yes, it's true. It is an online one. But when you're sitting and having your coffee.
No, I understand.
Telephone is
Yeah,
easy.
right.
Thanks so much for coming.
Sure.
Really
Thank you for
appreciate
having
it.
me. I appreciate the
And
opportunity.
I also want to talk to you just a little bit privately about how do you close an airport?
I do not know that, and I don't really want to. I don't want that to be the message of this program. But I'm saying, in the broader scope of things, it's on the table now in a way that it wasn't ever before. I think.
True.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.